Yeah, as was introduced just now, I'll talk a little bit about Windows privilege escalation, or more specifically about three specific PowerShell scripts that you can use to escalation vectors on Windows systems. But before we talk about that, let me just quickly introduce myself. As was already said, I do hold a Bachelor of Science in Applied Computer Science. And before I came to Expert Labs, I was working as a sysadmin. So I started my career in IT in 2014. And now I'm part of the Expert Labs Red team. And I'm also doing some penetration testing on the side when there's some red team engagements. So especially for, let's say, assumed breach assessments. So where there's not too much focus on being silent, but more on getting the job done and being quick. It's a little bit too much work to find all the possible vectors for privilege escalation on Windows systems by hand. So there are scripts, especially PowerShell scripts, that are easy to employ to solve this problem. And I want to take a quick look at possible escalation vectors, and also the scripts that either check for them or don't. So I've prepared 3 scripts. Power Up, which should be probably the most well known. Then there's Prefest Check and Windows enum. And as is already kind of obvious from this table, they do differ quite a lot in what they implement and how they implement it. And I want to take really a quick look at the possible vectors that are checked or not, depending on the script. And then at the end, there's going to be 3 possible vectors that are checked by each of the scripts. And I'll have a quick demo. So you're going to see the scripts live in action. And we're going to talk about the differences in the tooling output, because that's quite important. And I'll come to that later, why that's really important. But first, as can be seen from quite a lot of green in the middle column here and quite a lot of red in the other 2, some vectors are checked by some scripts, while they are not checked by others. For instance, the always install elevated escalation vector, which is probably the how do you put this? The lowest hanging fruit of all the possible vectors. It's just a simple registry key that can be set or not, depending on whether you want to have programs installed with elevated privileges or not. Then there's 2 different vectors for DLL injection, which is what makes it interesting here is that the first vector, the ghost DLL injection, is covered by Prefest Check, while the search order hijacking is not, while that's covered by Power Up. So the bigger picture here is relying on one single script to check all the vectors doesn't really work, but rather checking with the different scripts on the same system gives a more complete picture. Besides the DLL hijacking, checking for user privileges is also quite interesting. So, for instance, read or write access to important directories, and also in the light of recent Windows exploits, there was the Hive Nightmare, aka Serious Sam exploit that made quite a lot of noise on the internet in the last couple of weeks. Power Up isn't maintained very well. Actually, I believe it hasn't been really maintained for the last 4 years. So the newer exploits, such as the Hive Nightmare one, are not covered. But Prefest Check and Windows enum, which are still maintained, they check for that. And lastly, the 3 attack vectors that I've talked about in the beginning that are checked by all the 3 scripts are mostly related to services in Windows, but also credentials and flat files. So For instance, if there is, let's say, clear text credentials stored on files on the file system, that's a very easy way of getting privileged access to a system, since you'll just have clear text credentials that you can log in with. But as we'll see in the demo, not every script checks for that in the same way, and some output is more limited than the output of other scripts, more useful. And also, so I believe probably one of the most common ways of escalating privileges on a Windows system is abusing services. Depending on misconfigurations, it can be possible to abuse services in a way that allows for privilege escalation. So I've prepared a practical demonstration. I've already logged into my CVE machine in the background. That's just a virtual machine that is let's say that contains quite a lot of free software, where we develop some exploits. And as for a good presentation is almost necessary, I've already prepared something in the background. So I've worked some magic to get this running, because all of these scripts are openly available through GitHub. So there are antivirus signatures for those scripts. So just simply running those won't work, but I've prepared something, and it hopefully should work now, as we'll see in a second. So we'll start with Power Up, probably the oldest, but also maybe the most well-known script. And I'll just run the privesc audit, which will invoke simply all checks. And this might take a couple of seconds, as it checks for all the vectors that you just saw in the first slide. And also this machine isn't the quickest. But as you start to already see output here, and this is already also the output that we're looking for. As you can see, it's talking about service paths here, and also about modifiable files. So I'll just wait for this to finish, which should be any second now. There we go. So I'll just, there's a lot of stuff on that machine. This is why you're seeing this much output. The second script I've prepared is privesc audit. I have also prepared some antivirus countermeasures in this shell, so this should hopefully also just simply work. Yeah, there we go. We'll also just quickly wait for this to finish, but as you can see, there's also already stuff with services.
But Calvin, why are you not giving a talk about what you did there?
Yeah, we'll probably come to this. We will probably talk about that next time on how to mess with the antivirus on Windows, and how to get the naughty stuff running even though it shouldn't. And then while this is running, we can start the last one in the background. I know the command looks a little different. This is because the script wants to run in a different way, but this should also just work. Yeah, looking good. So yeah, it'll also just simply run in the background. Okay, I would say while the scripts are running, we can check for the output of the first script. So what we're looking for is we're looking for services, Windows services. And there's multiple ways on how we can abuse services to escalate our privileges. One, for instance, is if the permissions for the service are too loose. So if users have too much permissions on the services, you can manipulate the service. For instance, you can swap out the service binary, or you can intercept the path if the path for the service binary is not configured properly. And as we're seeing here, and this is probably the most important part about why Power Up is differs from the other scripts in the output. As you can see, there's a lot of it tells us it has found a lot of services that are apparently abusable. But one thing that should stand out is if you look at the modifiable file, it always says that's the C volume, which doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it. And this is the same for every service that is listed here. So, I mean, you can guess how many of these services. I mean, looking at this part, you can try and guess how many of these services are actually vulnerable and how many of these are false positives. I'll give you a hint. Let's say abusing service paths to escalate privileges on this machine isn't really possible, but we'll come to that later. Also, we've talked about flat files, so credentials and flat files. There's also some output here, as well as, oh, why can I not? Okay, my shell is broken. Okay, there we go. Now I can mark stuff. So it tells, for instance, it tells me that there's an unattended file, and sometimes there can be important credentials be stored in unattended files, but similar to what I've just told you about the services, in this case, no luck here. So most of this output is really just noise. And that's an important takeaway for these kinds of tools, that the output is not always 100% reliable, but it always needs to be checked what the output really is showing you. But if we, for instance, if we look at privesc check, if you scroll up a little bit where it talks about the services, let's see. So for instance, we just saw the unattended file, which we just saw PowerUp talk about the unattended file, where privesc check says unattended files not vulnerable. So and this narrative is going to continue throughout this demonstration, where the tooling output differs quite substantially. We can see this here. We're at the services part, where we had a lot. I just want to show you again how much output actually was there was in the PowerUp with the PowerUp script. And all of these are false positives. But if you check for the services in privesc audit, it tells us it says not vulnerable at every single one here, which is more reliable output. So yeah. The last script that I've prepared also checks for services. For instance, the unquoted service paths, which would allow path intersection. And as we can see here as well, there's also no output because we do not actually have vulnerable services. So the output of the first script was actually quite misleading. How do I know? I have a problem here. I might not be able to leave the remote desktop session because the screen sharing is in the way. 1 second. One second. We'll be right back. Technical difficulties. Just a second. Just a second. I'll fix that.
That's the part where we jump in about the question about the next meetup. So at some point we shall see if we want to keep the 1 month intervals or if we want to go back to 2 months. Participation today, I think that looks quite okay. So feel free to leave your feedback later via Slido. So was that enough time?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, technical difficulties seem to be ironed out. So yes, this concludes the practical demonstration, but let me talk about the takeaway here. So the privesc scripts are very useful tools for saving a lot of time on finding possible privilege escalation vectors in Windows systems, especially if you can be noisy. So if endpoint detection and like the blue team is aware that there's testing going on, you do not need to be too stealthy. These can be great tools for getting work done in a timely manner. But the takeaway is that one has to be very careful with the output and always need to manually verify what these kind of tools are actually telling you. Because if we take the power up example, if one would have just simply put the output into a report and would have told the customer, hey, there's like 25 services on your system that are vulnerable to privilege escalation, then this would have been quite so. You would have probably gotten into trouble for submitting such a report. And on the other hand, as we saw with the DLL and hijacking, it can be very useful to employ multiple of these tools to actually find a wide range of possible attack vectors, so that in the end one can say that there was actually a thorough investigation. Yes. So I open myself up to questions, if there are any. Have you also evaluated WinPeas? I read in the chat. Actually, so I know about WinPeas, and I think I've used it once or twice. The reason why I've specifically evaluated these three tools is because all of them are PowerShell scripts. And running PowerShell scripts on Windows systems, especially Windows systems that have EDR, is incredibly easy if one knows how to properly do it. For me, it was interesting to see that let's say the way that I get these tools to run on the machines is similar. And for me, it was important to decide on what of these tools are actually worth putting like the time in running them and evaluating the output, while other tools might I'm seeing questions about ARMSI and EDR, while other tools might need different methods of getting them to run. So and also having, let's say, different capabilities in terms of how they interact with the system. So I think due to the fact that these are all PowerShell scripts, they should be relatively comparable. There's also, I just want to mention, just for the sake of completeness, there's a lot more other tools out there that allow auditing of Windows systems, but most of them are not delivered in the same way. Which one do you find the most useful tool for privilege escalation, particularly on newer patched Windows Server environments? I believe that a combination of PrivEsc audit, so the second tool I showed, and the third tool, WinEnum, is pretty good. So PowerUp shows, let's say, easy vectors of privilege escalation, but as you saw, the results are less than reliable, and also it's not an actively maintained tool. So I do not believe that one can expect that current or newer attack vectors will be added into the checks. So Johannes keeps buzzing me about whether I'm going to give a talk about how I did all the bypassing. I might do in the future. That depends on audience response. But I think that might be a topic that's not fit for lightning talk. So yeah.
Also, one more question from Manuel.
Yeah, I saw that. How did you bypass the EDR? Just disable ARMSI, then load the PowerShells directly into memory from a website? Yes, that's what I did in this case. Though there's also some potholes or some sinkholes that you can fall into with ARMSI bypasses. So there's also some anecdotes that I could talk about engagements where I told the customer, hey, I cannot get the tooling to run. And in the end, I did get it to run because ARMSI bypasses are not ANSI bypasses. There's a lot of different things to consider. Okay, did I cover everything? Are there any more questions? And I'm only reading the chat in the Zoom. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just check a slide. I haven't seen any questions yet, but yeah, if you have any questions, just post in the chat now.
So WinPeers, you already answered. I didn't get it. This is a privilege escalation tool from GitHub.
WinPeers is also it's another privilege escalation tool. Yeah, I believe you can find it on GitHub, but it's as far as I'm aware, it's not a PowerShell script. I think it's an executable, a Windows PE executable. Oh, and also, okay, you get it either as an executable or a batch script. So it's similar in the sense that it's also checking for possible, so it's enumerating the system, checking for possible attack vectors. But as I mentioned earlier, I specifically evaluated the PowerShell scripts because I believe that these are comparable as they are all PowerShell scripts. So they're delivered in the same way. You can deliver them in a similar way. You can execute them in the same way. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Are there any more questions?
Nice talk. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Found it also really useful. And yeah, looking forward for the next talk when you're really going to talk about all the bypassing.
Which also will be totally voluntarily again.
There's probably going to be some training on that in the future to come, which we'll probably talk. Are we having any URL for PrivEsc audit and WinPeers? So are you asking whether I can share the URLs to the resources with you? Is this what you want to know? Yeah, sure. I believe I can provide. It's open source tooling. I'm sure I can provide that. So
and also they put it in the slides. Provide the slides.
Yes, we could upload the slides anyway.
All right, sure, will do.
Great. Okay, then let's move on going towards the outro and then the socializing section. Just take over. Stop your screen again. Okay, I guess as I said before we move towards the socializing section, let's just have a quick overview of Project Spotlight and then move on to the upcoming OWASP Meetup. If you're a penetration tester or just a web application security developer, you probably ever worked commonly with APIs. And as part of that, one project we found really useful is the OWASP API Security Top 10. And that project, again, is also an OWASP, I think it's an OWASP, one of the more intermediary projects, but it focuses heavily on the strategies and solutions to understand and mitigate unique vulnerabilities associated with APIs. And if you really want to understand how to break applications that work with APIs, or the other side, if you want to build more secure application, definitely check out the API Security Top 10. Go to owasp.org/www-project-api-security. And there's a long section of resources, a big document of like, I think 50 pages that you can check out, including mitigation techniques and how to break the vulnerabilities. Moving on to the follow-up section. As you're aware, we are not aware is that we have Twitter. So we regularly keep posting on Twitter on the OWASP Frankfurt, OWASP PE. Also, if you want to get in touch with us, please use Slack or our email. Usually the Slack community is something we'd like to highlight because it has around 3,000 to 5,000 application security professionals. And you can just join them via slack.owasp.org. And you can also get in touch with us via the Chapter Germany channel. Again, you probably all know the meetup page, but just keep an eye on upcoming meetups and just sign up as soon as they open up. And again, slides will be made available on our chapter's website. So if you want to go check out our previous events, just go on www.chapter Germany Stammtisch Frankfurt, and then you can also find the slides as well as the recordings for today's session on YouTube as well as on the Chapter Germany Stammtisch website. And Johannes, let's talk about the upcoming OWASP meetup.
Yeah, there will be one.
Yes. So, the question is now, and that's also something we would like to get some feedback from you on whether you think we just keep continuing with our virtual sessions if you enjoy them, and also what time periods. So please let us know. We haven't had a plan for next upcoming meetup. It's likely going to take place towards fall, so either late September or October. But please let us know. Give us a feedback and say what you would like to see, and also what sort of meeting format you enjoy.
We can maybe also talk a little bit once the recording is off.
Yes. Okay. Otherwise, again, provide us with your feedback on the OWASP Stammtisch meetup page, just via the Slido. Let us know what you think, what you like, what you didn't like, and particularly let us know about the best way for this to go forward, especially considering going back in person in Frankfurt. All right, Johannes, let's head over to the after party section.
Hey.